Be their messenger.
We have the English for English and
Oh yeah, I need to do that.
I started it. I'm like halfway through, and then we have a concept that was probably.
I have political science.
There we go. All right. All right, let's make sure this is on. Okay. All right, guys. Happy 8th period. I almost said Friday, but it's not Friday. Unfortunately. I know. Something like that. But yeah. Tuesdays I'm quickly finding are going to be my hardest days because having a lunch is great with the exception of 3 straight periods. That is not fun. I know, that's not fun. I didn't even realize that until today. After Faith and Reason, I was like, oh, okay, I've got a break. I was like, oh, I already took my lunch. Crap. Just power through. It's all right. But it's okay. We're all getting used to the new schedule. Okay, pray with me, please. Grant to us, Lord, we pray, the Spirit to think and do always those things that are right, that we who cannot exist without you may by you be enabled to live according to your will. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. Okay, so what I handed out to you is something we'll take at the latter half of class and we'll use. That's to give you kind of an introduction to all the different topics in the topics, the 15 different questions that you will choose one of tomorrow to study and to research like throughout the rest of the year. But to start, what I want to do is talk about the concept of worldview and what that, define it, but then not just talk about what it means, but like why it's important. But the way I want to start is to kind of ask a little bit different question. Yesterday, one of the thing that we ended with is talking about how education is not just an informative task, but it is a transformative task. It forms us as people. And so we use that to kind of highlight, okay, well, what and why is a worldview important then? Because if it's a formative task, then education naturally becomes a part of our worldview. Or for some people it comes out of, for some people it forms their worldview, okay? So to begin talking and thinking through worldview, thinking through the idea of worldview, I want to begin by thinking about, okay, well, why is a worldview important? Or what is the need? Where is the need for one? And I want to do it by this discussion question. And I promise this discussion question makes sense, or it will make sense, but it's kind of weird the way that I ask it. But just bear with me. So, imagine that you are not living on Earth, but that you are from another planet. And you have been tasked to go to Earth and to study humanity. Yeah. So you've been tasked to go to Earth, and they're just going to plop you in a city, whether it's Times Square, whether it's downtown Indy, doesn't matter, with lots of people where you now are being tasked to study their interactions. How they interact with others, how they act themselves. Basically, you're being asked to be like a Martian people watcher. Have you ever people watched? People watching is amazing. I love people watching. When we used to be able to get together in large groups, it would always be a lot of fun. The idiosyncrasies that like people show when they think they're not being watched by someone in a public place, right? I'm not like people watching by peeking in my neighbor's windows, right? But like, that would be weird. Then it'd be creeper. In a public place where they don't think anyone's watching them and they're just acting normal. It's like weird and awesome and beautiful to like see the way that people interact with each other and like the little gestures that people make. But also the really like troubling thing that like ways that people interact with themselves or with others. People watching is something that I love to do so much that it takes away from other things that I'm doing. Like a couple years ago, I went to the Post Malone concert that was at White River. And rather than like actually listening to like the music and like watching the concert, I just watched people in the crowd. Like it was ridiculous. Like it was one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen. And in the same way, a year ago, Kim and I went to see Johnny Swim at the Egyptian Room, and it was the same thing. Like it's way more fascinating to watch people and how they interact and how they handle themselves and how they just their like disposition than it was for me to even watch Johnny Swim, who like I adore. I love them. So this is what I'm asking you to do, but with people in general. And obviously this is not a real thing where I'm asking you to like go to Mass Ave and like watch people, but I'm asking you to like find an objective perspective of humanity. And if you could come up with some like key qualities or characteristics of those people that you're being asked to watch, what would you say? Like, what are key descriptors that you would use? What are key words that you would use to describe humanity? So I want you to write down a handful in your commonplace book. Give me 3 or 4. So yeah, if you haven't gotten that out yet, get your commonplace book out. 3 or 4 like key terms that describe humanity. Let me give you one that's just kind of that I've given for every class to start with. Humanity is, or humanity seems to be, very busy. Everyone walks like wildmen. Head down, leaning forward a little bit, and then you just like, you're going places. You got a place to be. You got to get there quick, right? You got time is money, and it's important. We've got that perspective, right? So humanity is very busy. What other things, and this is not just a negative thing, I don't want you to think of the negative aspects of what humanity is, but like positive as well, right? So whatever comes to mind, take like a minute or 2, think through that. Okay, what do you guys think? What are some of the key, what are some of the descriptor words or phrases, whatever, that you guys came up with? Yeah, gee. Diverse. That's great. In other classes, people have said unique, which I think like unique is just an example of like diversity, right? People are different looks, different personalities, right? In a lot of different ways. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Motivated. All right. This is good because I think that motivation is obviously is something that we definitely see amongst people, but I think also that there is that this is a positive leaning of that, which I totally agree with. But I think also you could see this in a negative way, what's a term that you could think about that you might think about or that you might might have written down that might be like a negative side of being motivated. Stubborn is the one that I think of. I think greed is one. Yeah. There are a couple of them, but I think stubborn is too. Because you can be motivated, but you can also be very stubborn in that sense, right? So I'm just thinking of positive, negative aspects of it. Yeah, that's good. What else? Yeah. Uncomprehendable. Uncomprehendable. Okay, so what caused you to say that?
I couldn't really think of one word that just described what humanity was. And it's just, when I think of humanity in general, I just think of it's very complex.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you another question. How is humanity complex? Give an example.
Everyone kind of is in their own little bubble and thinking their own little things, and in a way, it's just everyone's separate from each other in their own mind, but at the same time, everyone's together on the same earth.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a lot.
Yeah. No, I like that. I think that's true. When I think of humanity being complex, I think of the range of emotions that we feel in a day and what might cause those. So I immediately think of, maybe a guy or maybe a girl breaks up with a boyfriend but is sad about it. Right? That's a complex emotion. The fact that that someone might not be good for you, but you still like them, but you know that you can't be with them, right? Or that you shouldn't be with them. I think of complex emotions as with kids wanting to hold on to a toy, but also giving it away, and knowing that as a 5 or 6 year old they want to play with that thing, but they also want someone else to have it. There's a level of complexity there that is very incomprehensible or uncomprehendable, right? That you just don't understand or is not easy to understand that humans hold. Yeah. That's good. I really like that one. What else? Yeah, Faith. What is it? Talented. Yeah. Maybe this Martian anthropologist got dropped on Times Square and they were playing America's Got Talent. That guy can juggle a lot. But I get what you're saying. Talented in more ways than just talent shows. That's good. What else? Yeah, Claire.
Are they really protective of what they're taught, their possessions, their families, their groups?
Yeah, that's good. What else? Yeah, Naya. Passionate. Absolutely. What, with motivated, what might be the negative side of passionate? What do you think? If you think of the mutated in a negative sense, the form of passion, to be passionate, what might come to mind? Yeah. Yes. But I'm thinking of a term for that, right?
Maybe.
I'm not thinking of it, but I think that there is one. I'm not thinking of one.
Ignorance to everything else. You're so focused on one thing.
Okay. So passionate could be considered or could blend into maybe being self-centered. Sure.
Well, it's not with the passion self-centered part, but with the motivated part. I put down distracted. Because you might be motivated by the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it absolutely does. I mean, humanity is definitely distracted. Like, have you seen the YouTube videos of people on their phones, but they fall into the fountain at the mall? Like, there's a video of a woman who's on her phone and literally doesn't look up to like see where she's walking for like 30 seconds. Like, watching the video is like, have you ever seen a movie where someone's driving and then they look over at like the passenger for like a little bit too long? Where you're like, what? No, but you don't wreck, but it's just like regular, where they're like, oh yeah, and like talking while they're driving, but eyes aren't on the road. Every time I see that, I'm like, put your eyes on the road, put your eyes on the road. What are you doing? Like, that's not normal, that's too long. That's the way I was when I was watching this video. I was like, you have to look up, like, you're going to run into someone. And then she like trips and falls into the fountain. Distracted is definitely a key characteristic, I think, of humanity. That's a good one. I think of, and I don't know if this is the best word for it, but when I think of like the mutated form of passion, or to be passionate, I think of, not necessarily self-centered, though that is a part of it, is consumed. Like that we're consumed by something. Might be love. Might be a job. Might be a thing, like a hobby, right? And I think that to be passionate is a great thing. But to be consumed by that passion, probably not. Yeah. I think that's like the next step of that. Not addictive. Addicted. Yeah, that's good. What else? Give a couple more. Yeah.
I said evolving.
Evolving.
Yeah.
All right. Humanity is ever changing. That's good. I agree with that. We don't use evolving. It's Christian school, but that was a bad joke. That'll make more sense when we go through origins. Yes, evolving. I think that's a good one. Ever changing, always growing, always transforming. That's important. What else? Yeah. No.
Maybe not all, but I said
Confused? No, I think that's a good one. Okay, that's a great one to end on, because I think that this list is a great list because it gets to the heart of what's really at stake with our day-to-day, and how do we know who we are. I don't want to say the heart of this, but like the big point to kind of glean from this is not how does humanity stink, or like how do they suck, or how are they awful, right? But it's how do we respond, or how can we even begin to think about responding to these issues that come up, right? Both positive and negative, because it's very easy, given our tendency to like ruin really good things, to say, hey, we can be motivated, that's great. But motivation very quickly turns into stubbornness. Passion very quickly turns into being consumed by something, right? So how can we not just respond, but actively engage with these issues that we see come up, or this condition, maybe, is a better way of saying it. Because I think that everything that you guys, this list that you guys have created, is something called the human condition. It's not just negative, but it's also very positive. Blaise Pascal, 6th century guy. Have you guys ever heard of like Pascal's wager or Pascal's triangle? Maybe? Yeah? Yeah. He's a mathematician, but he's also a philosopher and a theologian. He wrote this book, Pense, that you guys will go through in next week and read a little bit of. But in observing humanity, he came to the conclusion that these three ideas, or these three terms, were the perfect description of humanity. He said humanity is inconstant. We lack a level of consistency that says we stick with things. We always move from the next thing to the next thing to the next thing. And I think that that is still true today. Humanity is bored. We find that we're bored, which is where maybe those passions turn to being consumed, or, the good things turn to bad things. And we're anxious. These three things, I think, are key descriptors of humanity in the 6th century, as Pascal said, but they're also key descriptors of humanity in the 21st century. Like, that hasn't changed. So when we address, or when we think about how we can address these issues, I mean, especially like the negative ones, the confused, the distracted, the consumed, I mean, even protective, complex, right? What is necessary? Well, I'm going to say that what is necessary is a specific lens through which we can view the world. A worldview, right? So, I know, that's cheesy, but it fits. The worldview. So let me give you a definition of a worldview, talk about why they're important, and then get into the topics. So the definition of a worldview that I want to give you is a framework of values. That determine our interaction with the real world. So a worldview is a framework of values that determines your interaction or our interaction with the real world. So the real world being like, okay, when you experience something like suffering, how does your worldview help you to not only process that event, but also to understand it, to find some sort of meaning from it? If it does, great. If it doesn't, your worldview is probably not great. It might address, like some worldviews address some aspects of our experience in our human life, right? But not all. Like, skipping ahead a little bit, the whole reason the Christian worldview is so profound is that it addresses every question that we have about life in a way that is both appropriate and leads to this thing called deep, sustainable joy. The Christian worldview can take suffering and can take joy in the same question or in the same topic and respond to both of them properly. That's why we have the book of Job, right? So there's a number of reasons why the Christian worldview or Christian theism is the most important or the best. But the next 3 quarters are going to be us getting through that. So here's what a worldview is. Worldview needs to be distinguished from a religion. A religion fits underneath a worldview, but they are not the same thing. Basically, there are 9 worldviews. There are 9 frameworks of values that determine how people interact in the world. You don't have to write all of these down. I'm not going to ask you to remember them, but if you'd like to write them down, you can. Christian theism is like Christianity, right? It is, what? Oh, Christ. It's just my shorthand for Christ. It's a key. It's a Greek key. So it's just an X. Yeah. So Christian theism is Christianity in that sense, God in flesh and the incarnation, triune God, all of that. Deism, founding fathers. Their faith was very different than what we would refer to as Christian theism, okay? Deism is like clockmaker God. God created the world, let it go, and has separated himself from it. Naturalism or materialism, physical world is all that matters, or all that's real. That's what we talked about yesterday with materialism, right? Nihilism is that there is no one can draw or find meaning from anything. Are you guys familiar with Ernest Hemingway? Yeah, he wrote The Old Man and the Sea. The Grapes of Wrath? No. Shoot. No. I can't remember the other books that he read. But, because The Old Man and the Sea is one of my favorites. He was a nihilist, and eventually his lack of meaning and purpose because of his worldview led him in his home in Cuba to put a shotgun in his mouth and shoot himself. here's the thing, with a worldview, like that's grotesque and that's a terrible thing that happened. But if your worldview tells you there is no meaning in anything that you do, that's a logical consequence. There's no possibility for like joy or love or peace or unity or harmony when there's no meaning in anything. So I don't know why people would choose this, but they do, and that's whatever. Existentialism is the belief that one's existence comes before any sort of like meaning or value or purpose. So what that means is that within existentialism, I create my own meaning. I make what is valuable and what is purposeful such. Pantheistic monism, God is all things. Not God is in all things. God is all things. So like the tree, the pine tree out there, that's God. Yes, we are all gods. I mean, the table is probably a god. And I'm not trying to like discredit it or like make fun of it, but everything that you encounter is God. New Age spirituality. New Age spirituality is as if to say, if your life is terrible, speak into existence. Give to the universe what you want. And then the universe will give it back to you. There was a really popular book a couple years ago, like a decade ago, called The Secret, where it's like you create a vision board and you focus on something that you really want, and if you focus on it enough and you give yourself to it, the universe will give it to you. It's kind of strange. That's hysterical. That's what someone else said.
Yeah, like talks about like writing down certain things like a certain amount of time and like doing it all in a certain order. Doing something with candles and stuff, and apparently it's supposed to like give you
That's interesting. I mean, it is. Here's what I would say. It's not bad to want something. It becomes problematic if you think that there is a very easy way of doing that by just like speaking it into the world, right? Like, I want $1 million. I'm just going to wait. It's like people who like use God as that, right? Like, oh God, I want a lake house. Like, it's a desire of my heart. Proverbs, right? The one who loves God, he will give him the desires of his heart. I desire a lake house. I'll wait. It's not really that. That's hysterical, though. I forget who it was. Abby Masclier said that as well. It's funny that's on TikTok, too. This is also, some people will put, and I only say this as like, to be silly, but also it is true. We'll put like essential oils in like New Age spirituality. Whatever. I mean, if you think thieves is gonna, give you joy, great. But whatever. Postmodernism, you create truth. Like whatever is true, I create that truth. Whatever's true is my truth. So it's a very like subjective view of all things that we might find to be universal. Okay, we're going to talk about postmodernism a lot, and then Islamic theism, which is basically Islam. God sent the Prophet Muhammad as to be a mouthpiece for him, and people worship Muhammad and pray to all that. So let me give you a couple that we're going to emphasize. Those four we're going to really, really talk about because they're really important for how they can both be mistaken and even sometimes substituted for Christian theology. So, here are the worldviews. Now the next question, and I'm going to give it to you really quickly because I want to get to the topics so that if you guys have questions about any topics, I can answer those because we're running out of time quickly, is why is it important to recognize that you not just have a worldview, but like what your worldview is, or why having a worldview is so important. Any worldview requires a reason to believe in it. Any worldview requires a reason to believe in it. If there isn't, then why do you believe it? Like, that's at its heart. But here's the why behind, I think, why worldviews are so necessary. Number one is that it helps make sense of my experience. I'm just writing EXP for experience. It helps make sense of my experience. Let me give you a quote here. Henry Nouwen, who's a famous Christian writer and theologian and spiritual director, of some sorts, says, "We must allow the daily experiences of life, all of my experience, joy, loneliness, fear, anxiety, insecurity, doubt, ignorance, understanding, the need for affection, support, and the long cry for love, to be recognized as an essential part of the spiritual quest." So what Nouwen is saying is that we are all spiritual beings, and every one of our experiences, whether it's good or bad, positive or negative, is a part of that. So a worldview has to take the best. A worldview has to take the best day of your life and the worst day of your life, and say we can draw meaning from both of those. Right? So, and I think that, just as an aside, that's what separates Christian worldview, the Christian worldview, from every other worldview, is that it is able to do that. The second thing is that it fits my entire experience in it. And here's what this means. Take materialism, right? It doesn't fit the entirety of our naturalism. It doesn't fit the entirety of our experience in it because there are some things that we don't know. There is this thing called mystery that is a part of our life. You can make that, or you can have that be as, plain scientifically as you want, right? That there are still things about the body that we have no clue why they work or how they work or what they do. It is a mystery. So because we don't know exactly how it works, does that mean that we just ignore it? That doesn't exist. The appendix, that doesn't exist. Until it inflames and almost kills you. Right? Okay. But also, that was something I used a couple years ago, but since then they've actually figured out the appendix is just kind of the trash dump of the body. It doesn't really do anything until it inflames, until it gets infected, and then it can kill you. That's awesome. Body's great. So we have this sense of mystery, and not even just with our body, but with the universe. There are things that we don't know about it. But the problem is that we cannot reject those things as not being real or not being a part of our experience or not being valid. So your worldview has to take that along with, I would say, the things that are logical, things that are rational, common sense, all of that. Takes both of those things, which seemingly contradict, and says, no, we can see how these connect. There's a covenant for this. It's called faith and reason. Hey. Yeah. Please ask it anyways.
Worldview is the umbrella term religion fits under it.
Yes.
So all the major religions should fit into one of these 9 types.
These 9 types, I'm going to admit, are a synthesis of probably 12 to 15 that people will say and can argue, hey, this is a worldview, it's not just a religion. Atheism, right, is a worldview. I don't like that because, and I think that it fits better underneath one of these other ones, nihilism or postmodernism or New Age, right? With Judaism, I think it fits under some of these. With Buddhism, I think it fits under a few of these. With Hinduism, right? Even though they're different religions, they hold the same worldview. In the same way that I want to say that the Christian worldview is not the same as having Christian faith, right? I can have a biblical worldview where, I'm a good person, I love others, I put others before me, right? But not be a Christian. So I think that that's the distinction to be made there, is that we're talking about worldviews, we're not talking about necessarily religions or things that run people's lives to the point of it's salvation or salvific or it's redemptive, in that sense. Yeah, that's not a dumb question at all. That's a great question. Anything else? Other questions? Great. Now, so it fits my entire experience in it. One of mystery and one of common sense and rationality. It connects both of those. And then the last one is that any worldview is worth its weight if it finds itself to be a home for character formation. The Christian worldview, I think, is one that holds that above almost all the other ones, in that the Christian worldview finds that character formation is a really key part of it because it aligns my desire to know myself more, selfhood, right, with something that is not available in this earth, but something that is outside of this world. I'll use the language of a transcendent object, that object being God, right? Because other than that, like, how do you know what being a good person is? Obviously, loving people, serving people is, but like, why do you do that? What's the goal of doing that, right? There are a lot of other questions that come into play. Christian worldview finds character formation finds a home in Christian worldview, more so than the other ones. Now, here's where we get into the details of it, is that a worldview, and I'll say this just kind of this, a worldview must adequately respond to all of life's fundamental questions and our needs and our issues that we come up with. So how do you test a worldview, whether or not it's valuable or not? Well, you have to identify some big issues first, and then say, okay, does this worldview address that issue? Does your worldview address the issue of anxiety within humanity? Okay, it doesn't, then you probably leave it alone. It does, great. Which one is best? Which one addresses it the most effectively? The most appropriately? That's going to be this process that we're going to try to go through to say, okay, well, how does the Christian worldview actually address this the most appropriately and the most effectively? It doesn't always mean that we're going to come up with an answer, right? That like the Christian worldview says, don't be anxious because Jesus takes care of it all. Okay, I know that, but I'm still anxious. What do I do? It's a little bit more complex than that. But that's what we're going to talk about more later. So, identifying these big issues or big questions is what you have in front of you, all right? So get that piece of paper out. These are 15 questions, though there are 12 topics, right? So there are 15 questions that you will choose one of them tomorrow that will run the rest of your year, all right? And the goal of this is that those are 15 questions that, like, we at Covenant have kind of figured out as being, these are 15 of life's universal questions that you don't just ask if you're a Christian, but you especially ask if you're human. But again, we're trying to talk about, well, how the Christian worldview actually responds to those questions the best way and appropriately and stuff like that. So let's start with the first, world, which is the personal world. We have to start with the individual and with ourselves. So the first question is knowledge. What is my experience? That is dealing specifically with like our day-to-day experiences. The word we'll use for it is longing. Like, why is it that we do certain things over and over again, but we feel unsatisfied? Why is it I go to my job every day, but I feel unsatisfied? That's not me, by the way, but like, people do that. Why is it that I continually look for satisfaction and fulfillment in these other things? That's what our experience is. How do we come to understand why our experience is important and what it is? That's what knowledge is about. Purpose. Why do I exist? Well, that's a pretty clear question, right? Like that you can ask yourself, and hopefully if you are a senior, which you all are, who is like currently applying to colleges, maybe figuring out where you want to apply, what you want to study, this is probably a question you've asked yourself, like, what am I doing? Like, why do I exist on this earth? Am I just going to like be a trophy wife or a trophy husband? Or like, do you want to find meaning somewhere else? I wish trophy husbands existed. That sounds appealing. So why do I exist? And the word that we're going to use for that is love. Like, we exist to love others. And ultimately what we're going to say is that we exist to love Christ. That's where we'll go with that, but yeah. Identity. Who am I? Again, something that you'll probably have asked yourself, and you will continue to ask yourself basically every 5 years for the rest of your life. Because that's not something that just stops when you figure it out, because you're constantly changing. Like someone said, was it Claire? Did you say this? No. Gianna? Did you say this? Yeah, about evolving. Because we're constantly transforming. This question deals less with answering that question of who we are and more with how does what we engage with in our surroundings and around us impact who we are. So how is what we're encountering and engaging with form us or deform us? So that's the personal world. You're doing this is like an anthropological study of man, right? What you guys did up here, we're doing that with the personal world. Once we figure that out, then we'll go to the immediate world, which is the stuff right outside of us. Things like the first topic being society. There are 2 questions for that, and you can pick one of those questions. You don't just pick society, but you pick one of the specifics. To whom do I belong? All about relationships and love and friendship. So people who do that, I had someone last semester, Kennedy Conger, do that topic and did a paper on purity culture in Christianity. It's a great paper, great presentation, and how purity culture kind of jacks us up for understanding relationships. If you know what that is, don't worry about it. Because we'll probably talk about it when we get to that topic. The second is society. What is my responsibility to others? This deals with 2 things. Could be civic duty, like voting, running for office, whatever. Or it could do with vocation, like your job, your work, your calling, might be a way of saying that. So it's how do I serve and love others through what I'm doing, like my job, work, stuff like that. History is the next one. This is a tricky one because the question, right, is what is the meaning of human history? But what I'm really getting at with that question is how does the church transform human history, or how does the church function within human history as a whole? But also, this is a topic where a lot of people can get into, or have gotten into, and do get into, the question of politics, like church and state, which is really cool if you're interested in that. The readings deal mostly with like the church, but for your thesis, you can take it wherever way you want, all right? The last one is creation, and that is not like Genesis, but that is like stewardship of creation. Or the other side of that is science and faith, right? So how does science and faith connect, combine, compare, contrast, right? All of that. That's the immediate world because it's what we deal with immediately surrounding us. The next world is the conceptual world, and these deal with concepts. That's why a lot of our conversation in this world will revolve around like objective and subjective ideas. Objective is like objective truth; it's universal, right? Subjective is like personal; it's dependent upon my likes and dislikes, right? So within beauty, what is the meaning of beauty? We'll talk about like art, we'll talk about music, we'll talk about poetry, and we'll talk about film and stuff like that. But also, we're going to talk about like wonder, and what does wonder do to us when we encounter a song that moves us? What is it that actually like goes on in that process? Why does it do that? What does it do to me? Right? Another example of that would be like, okay, if Caleb's favorite movie is Dumb and Dumber, but I hate Dumb and Dumber, why is that? Is there not a movie that we should both agree on as like a good movie? Or is it just whatever we think is right is right? That's the key like question for like this conceptual world. Because we deal with it with beauty, we'll deal with it with truth. What is truth? How do we know what truth is? How do we come to know what truth is? We'll do a really cool project in January about where you guys will learn how to like juggle or do the pin flip. Did you guys see people doing that last year? Yeah. That's probably, they were in the middle of that project for me. Yeah, and we'll talk about that more. But it's all about like what is truth and how do we come to know what is true as an idea. And then the last one is goodness. Morality, what is a good life? Morality, virtue, and ethics. Why be good people? Why be bad people? What causes us to be good people? What causes us to be bad people? And then the second one is what is our response to suffering? So it's morality and then pain and suffering are those 2 questions that you can pick. Both of those are pretty popular, all right? And that's the conceptual world. Then the last world is the transcendent world, and that deals with things outside of our physical world, meaning origins, where do we come from? That's when we'll talk about Genesis. And most of the readings deal with how we should read Genesis 1 through 11 and how we read it in the best way possible. In the way that, it doesn't just give us like a science of the world, but it gives us an idea of actually who we are and how that question of where we come from impacts who we are. Destiny, we're not going to talk about heaven and hell, like where am I going, where are we going, but we're going to talk about hope a lot in that, because that's really where that topic kind of sits. And then God, the 2 are the incarnation. Is there a God? So Jesus being made flesh, or God being made flesh in the form of Jesus. And the Trinity, 3 in 1, 1 in 3. All right. So the key topics there, or the key terms there with the incarnation is like worship. Who do you worship? Why do you worship? That question of Jesus, like who do you say that I am? That's a really key part of that. With the Trinity, it's mystery. A.W. Tozer says, the Trinity is a doctrine for the heart. Let reason kneel outside in reverence. So talk a little bit more about those ideas as well. Okay. So those are the 15 questions with the 12 topics. Do you guys, in the next 7 minutes, or however long it takes, have any questions about any of them? I don't care what the questions are. Please ask. Yeah.
This is a silly question.
Okay.
But what do you think is the most popular topic?
The most popular?
Yeah, to pick.
Basically anything from the immediate world and anything from the conceptual world. The most popular, I would say, are like goodness and suffering, and then society, both of them in society. And that's just thinking about in the past. That might be different this year, so that's why it's hard for me to say that. Yeah, Faith.
When are we picking and when are we picking?
Tomorrow is when you're going to pick.
And then what are we actually picking?
You're picking one of the questions that you want to study.
1 through 15, you're picking one of them?
Yes. What I'll do is I'll give you a note card, and you'll write your name on it, and then you'll write 1, 2, 3. Number 1 is the topic, the question or the topic that you most want to do. Number 2 is the one that you second most want to do, and number 3 is the one you third most want to do. Right? Does that make sense? So you don't want to pick one like as number 3 that you're like, I guess I could do this, because then you might get it. I'm not saying you will, but you might. And then you're going to hate your life because you just threw something on there that you didn't really care about or that you didn't want to really do. Yes. Yes. So I have the ability to say, okay, it doesn't matter which 3 of these they want one of them. That's what's important. Because I want to make sure that like at least 1 or 2 people have each of the topics. Yeah. You absolutely can. And in the past, it used to be like 2 or 3 people per topic, because I would only do this a semester. But now it's like 7 or 8 people per topic. And I'm okay with that. So like that's why I say there's a good chance you might get your number 1. But I love the question of which ones are most popular, because most of the time if you pick goodness, like there's probably, I would say there's like a 70% chance. I would say there's a 30%, 40% chance that you're not going to get that. Yeah, it is. And I'm not saying you have to intentionally pick something that you might not want to do, but if you put like morality, like goodness, what is a good life, as number 1, then put 2 that you know that you really want to do, just in case. Yeah.
Okay, so we're picking the question that we want to study, and then for our paper, writing some more specifics on that?
Yes. So your paper is not going to be a direct answer to the question of what is my responsibility to others, but it will fit broadly in that category of society. What is my responsibility to others? Like, here's what I mean by, sorry, let me be more specific. Your paper is not a direct answer to that question. Your paper is a response to that topic's question. So that's why like people who do that of like, what is my responsibility to others, could write about how do we best serve others, like through I had someone once write down that the best way of serving, had a thesis, whether it was good or bad, whatever, that the best way to serve others is through creating urban gardens. It had this whole thesis on urban gardens and how Christianity is to serve the needs of people, the physical needs of people, before they serve their spiritual needs. That's a really cool thesis. Huh? Do what? Yes, I love the idea. The actual paper wasn't great, but the idea is fantastic. But it still addresses that issue of what is my responsibility to others, but in a much more specific way. We'll talk a little bit more about this on Friday, too. What else? Yeah, Megan.
So, you'll pick your question,
Mm-hmm.
and the word that's next to it, like, is that your word that goes with the question?
That's just a word. That's just a word that I have tried to give you to help describe, like, kind of where that question is going. Like, it's just a key term that I will use in some of our like lecture and discussion content. That is not necessarily a key term that you have to use and focus on, that like you have to put into your thesis. I'm not going to be like that ridiculous. your thesis can really be anything as long as it deals with, as long as it can be considered a response to this type of question, to your question. Yeah. Other questions? Okay. Yeah. No, it's okay.
So number 8, which is like what is the meaning of beauty, and you feel like the word was wonder.
Mm-hmm.
So would that be more going towards like how, like what it is like to be in wonder, or the importance of wonder?
That's going to the point of like when if you've ever listened to a song and it's made you cry, or it's like caused you to pause and like, oh my gosh, that song was amazing. What is behind that? Like, why is it that you have this sense of wonder at art, at a music or a painting or a movie, things like that? So, no, I was going to say, go ahead.
But it's not like explaining the importance of wonder? Like
I mean, it could be. Like, that's the beauty, no pun intended, that's the beauty of this, is that it could go that way. It doesn't matter, right? As long as it's responding that question of like, what's the meaning of beauty? And by meaning, it could be, what's the purpose of it? How does it work? Why does it work that way? It's broad in that. And the whole thing is, don't worry about like being too broad, because if you are, then in our meetings, I'll be able to like say, hey, this is getting a little too broad. We got to narrow it a little bit. Like, that's what the meetings are for. Okay, really quickly too, I emailed you guys via Canvas, the Covenant 100. That's something that if you're thinking, like if Naya's thinking, oh man, I might want to do beauty, look at that and see what books are underneath it. Might pique your interest. It might turn you off of it. I don't know. So that's just an added reference for you so that you guys can be as prepared for tomorrow as possible. Yeah, so that's it. Tomorrow, if you have any questions, shoot me an email. Be happy to answer them. But also, if you have any, if not tomorrow, then we'll pick our topic and we'll spend the whole day doing that. Yeah, or we can pick your topic really quickly and then, yeah, get to work on something else.
Don't erase it yet. I'm not gonna do it.
Okay. Yeah.